So now we're going to be covering shifting supply and shifting demand. So this is going to walk you through the supply and demand generals packet that is posted as an assignment. So if you're watching this without doing that, this will just run through what happens when demand and supply shift. So first of all, I wanted you to make sure you label everything on graphs. So if we always label our axes first. Then we label our demand curves and our supply. So what you see here is demand has increased. Demand shifted to the right. So demand increased. That means our equilibrium price and quantity changed as well. So if you notice Q1, which is lined up to our first equilibrium, is there. So you see our original equilibrium price and quantity. As it shifted to here with the change in demand, here is our new equilibrium. We draw out our new price and our new quantity. You'll see that looking at the y-axis, your price has increased and your quantity has increased. So due to the increase in demand, price and quantity both increased. Now let's move ahead because the second one really covers the same thing. So here is our next example. As always, we label our axes, price on the y, quantity on the x. Here is our original supply curve. Here is our supply curve that shifted. I'm going to label them 1 and 2 now. And demand, we only have one demand curve. Here is our original equilibrium. Here is our new equilibrium. So this is supply shifting to the left. That means supply has decreased here. So what had happened to our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity? Well, this is our original equilibrium quantity and price. This is our new equilibrium quantity and price. So price increased here, quantity decreased. So when you have a decrease in supply, price increases and quantity decreases. Here's our next example. As always, label your axes. We only have one demand curve because there's only one there, so label it D1. We have two supply curves, so label them 1 and 2. Means we have two equilibriums. Label the first one E1, the second one E2. So what happened to equilibrium price and quantity here? Well, here's our original. Q1, Q1. Here's our new. Q2, P2. So here we see, due to the increase in supply shifted to the right, we have a decrease in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. So when supply increases, price falls, quantity rises. Now here's another one. Now you see here, there is a different shape to these supply and demand curves, different steepnesses, different slopes, and a much larger shift. But here we have still, as always, labels are important. We have one demand curve. We have two supply curves. We label our equilibrium price and quantity. So here, partially due to the large shift in supply, but also partially due to the steepness of the demand curve, we have a large change in price. Price changed by a lot. price increased by a lot due to the decrease in supply. Supply shifted left. Quantity also decreased. So this is the same sort of setup as one of our previous ones. When supply decreases, price increases and quantity decreases. Now we get to the tricky ones where both curves shift. So it's important here to make sure you know which ones where the start and where the end was. We're going to assume both shift at the same time. So let's label our axes. Now this is our original demand curve because it's where the arrow is emanating from. That means this is our second demand curve. So demand shifted left. That means we have a decrease in demand. Here is our original supply curve because that's where the arrow comes from. There's our second supply curve. So that means that supply increased because it shifted to the right. So we have a decreasing demand and increasing supply. Now it helps here to make sure you label your original. So the original equilibrium is where our original two curves met. Our new equilibrium is where the two new curves meet. So what happened to equilibrium price and quantity? There's our original quantity. There's original price. Here's our new quantity. And here is our new price. So in this case, a decreasing demand and an increasing supply caused an increase to quantity. And it caused a decrease to price. So decrease in demand, increase in supply, increased our quantity, and decreased our price. Now, does that hold up when we move into our last example, which we have the same setup, if you notice? Demand is decreasing here, and supply is increasing. So there's our original and our second demand curves. Here is our original second supply curves. Label my axes. Here is our original intersection of supply and demand. So that's our original equilibrium. Now, in our last one, we saw that quantity increased, price decreased. So let's see if that holds up here. So at our original equilibrium, here is our price. Here is our quantity. At our new equilibrium, here is our quantity. Here is our price. So in this case, you see that quantity actually decreased. Price still decreased as well. But in this case, quantity decreased instead of increasing. Whereas when we had the same style of shifts in the last one, we had quantity increasing with price decreasing. If you think about what happened when the original curves shifted, this explains this sort of dissonance that's going on. You have to think of when demand shifts, what are its individual effects on price and quantity versus what happens when supply shifts and its individual effects on price and quantity. So if you look at this setup, you see that demand, when it increases, will increase equilibrium price and quantity. Demand, when it's on its own, when it decreases, will decrease equilibrium price, decrease equilibrium quantity. Supply, when it's on its own, will decrease equilibrium price and increase equilibrium quantity when it's increasing. Supply, when it's decreasing on its own, will increase price and decrease quantity. What happens when you combine them? Well, for that, you just look at these individuals and see, are they working together or are they at odds? If they're working together, then you can definitively say what's going to happen to price or quantity. If they're at odds, then you can't say. So, for example, if we look at demand decreasing and supply decreasing, we're looking at this setup and this setup. we're combining those two. So if you take a look at that, our prices are at odds here. That means we don't know what is going to take over. It depends. Did demand shift more? If demand shifted more, then you would expect the demand effect to actually work out and price would decrease. Did supply shift more? If that happened, then price would increase because the supply effect would kick in. But when you just have this setup of demand decreasing and supply decreasing, you don't know which one shifted more. So it's a question mark. You can't say. But when you look at the quantities, they are both decreasing. Since they're both decreasing, you can say for certain that quantity will decrease. Now, if we continue in this same vein and we say demand increases and supply increases, we find the same setup. When demand increases, it tries to increase price, while supply increases, it tries to decrease price. So if you don't know the magnitude of the shifts, you can't say what happened. However, quantity, they both work together. They both work to increase quantity. Therefore, you can say quantity has increased. When demand is decreasing and supply is increasing, so we're looking over here now. If we're looking there, demand decrease, supply increase, we see that the price effects are the same here. So price is going to decrease because a decrease in demand tries to decrease price, and an increase in supply tries to decrease price. However, they have opposing views when it comes to quantity. Demand tries to decrease quantity while supply tries to increase it. So you can't say for certain what happens to quantity. For the last one, you find the same setup but opposite, just like happened on the other side. So when demand is increasing and supply is decreasing, then your demand is trying to increase price and your supply is trying to increase price. So you can say for certain that your price will increase. For quantity, your demand is trying to increase quantity while your supply is trying to decrease it. Since they oppose, you don't know what happens there. This can be used as a general sort of cheat sheet to figure out what's going on. But something that I always find helpful when you are taking a test or something like that, whenever you have a double shift, if you can't remember or can't be certain of what happens to equilibrium price and quantity when each individual one shifts, just draw out a quick sketch. Two demand curves, demand shifts right. What happens to equilibrium price and quantity? Well, that just caused price to increase, quantity to increase, if I look at that real fast. Supply shifts to the right. What happened to equilibrium price and quantity? Well, price fell, quantity increased. If you just do that real fast, you should be able to figure out what's in this top portion on your own, and then from there piece it together for whatever double shift you need. I hope that helped.